Indiana, 1607. The maps do not admit it. The archives whisper of it only in margins, and even those margins are blackened with fire. But there was an asylum, and on one night in autumn, it burned. Every patient locked inside. Every scream sealed behind barred windows. And yet, no one speaks of it. They tell you there was no Indiana in 1607, no settlement large enough to hold such a structure. But then why does a Jesuit missionary, writing in the brittle Latin of his age, mention a house for the broken-minded, raised in the wilderness, where prayers turn to ash? Stay with me. Subscribe if you dare. Because what I am about to tell you was not meant for daylight. What happened here was deliberately erased. And the question remains why. Why would an asylum, built where no asylum should have been, ignite so completely? And why was its memory scrubbed from every ledger, every sermon, every map? The fire itself is only half the horror. The deeper truth lies in the silence that followed. 12 names scratched into the bark of an oak tree nearby. A charred crossbeam carried downstream, etched with words in a language neither English nor French. A burial ground with no stones, no records, only soil churned as though by restless hands. But what really happened? Some say lightning fell from a cloudless sky. Others say the physicians themselves set the wards alight, sealing their patients in, lest the world learn what they had been doing behind locked doors. Still others whisper of older forces. The land itself rebelling, torching what had never been meant to exist. And so the question sharpens, what was this place? And why was it erased from history? The earliest surviving reference is not a map, nor a government record, but a letter. Folded, water-stained. Its ink smeared into something more like bruises than words. It was discovered in the archives of a Jesuit mission 3 states away, dated Anno Domini 1607. It reads, "And I was brought to a house in the wilderness, where the broken souls were kept. Their cries carried into the trees at night, and the keepers said they were possessed of demons. Yet what frightened me more was the silence of the forest itself, as if even the birds refused to sing where such men were confined." The letter ends abruptly, with the bottom edge burned. Local oral histories, collected 2 centuries later, speak of a night when flames rose so high they turned the river red. Yet, the same storytellers add in hushed voices that no smoke ever came. A fire without smoke. A building reduced to ash, but without the marks of ordinary bully. Ledger entries, supposedly from a trading post in Vincennes, describe shipments of iron locks, thick oak planks, and chains ordered in the months before the fire. Yet the ledger's page for October 1607 is missing, torn clean from the book. Only a jagged edge remains, as though someone wanted not just to erase, but to silence. And so the story is caught between fact and folklore, between archive and ash. Here is the forbidden truth, whispered by those who dare to remember. There were patients inside that asylum when it burned. Some say a dozen. Others say closer to 50. Their names survive only as faint scratches on an oak tree that toppled during a storm in 1789. Witnesses swore they saw initials carved into the bark, ERTHMS. But the wood crumbled to dust before anyone could preserve it. Still, the earth remembers. Dig into the soil at the site, if you can find it, and you will find fragments of glass, warped by heat, and nails bent at strange angles, as if the building did not burn down so much as twist itself into ruin. The fire was said to begin at the stroke of midnight. But whose testimony do we trust, when all who claimed to witness it never agreed on the same details? A settler's journal, preserved in brittle paper at the Indiana Historical Society, contains only one sentence for that night. The bells tolled without hand nor clapper, and we saw the light rising where no steeple should have stood. Yet another document, this one an unsigned parish record, describes not bells but screams. The handwriting trembles, as if the ink itself resisted being laid down. The cries came all at once, then were swallowed. It was not the cry of man, but of something being unmade. Locals whispered that the asylum itself had been cursed from the beginning. Built on land that had once been a burial ground, perhaps, or raised with stolen stones taken from an abandoned church across the Ohio. The theories change with each retelling, but the sense remains the same: the building should never have existed. One legend claims that on the night of the fire, the river froze over despite it being autumn. Hunters said they heard no wind, no rustle of leaves, only the crack of timbers splitting and the sudden hiss of water boiling against stone. And yet, no body was ever recovered. Not one. How does a building filled with patients burn without leaving even a trace of bone? Some believe the keepers fled, taking the dead with them. Others claimed that the patients never perished, but were taken elsewhere. A century later, travelers recorded meeting old women in Indiana villages who swore that the children of the asylum still walked the forests at dusk. That they were not children anymore, but neither fully grown. That their eyes carried embers. But here is where the story fractures. The officials who dared to write about it at all described an accident, lightning, sudden fire, nothing more. The folklore, on the other hand, speaks of doors that never opened, chains that rattled even as the flames roared, and a silence afterward so deep that no one dared rebuild. And always, the question remains, what really happened on that night in 1607? The first map that almost admits the asylum existed is not American at all. It is French, drawn in 1632 by a cartographer named Guillaume Rochefort. The parchment shows the Wabash River winding like a vein through the wilderness. And there, in the margin, half inked, then crossed out, are the words, Maison de Feu, the House of Fire. Yet no subsequent map repeats this label. By 1650, the land is marked only as Marais, swamp. By 1701, it is blank, as though the cartographer's hand hesitated and chose silence. Why mark a house, only to erase it? The archives in Vincennes hold another piece of the puzzle: an inventory list from 1606. It is ordinary at first. Flour, salted meat, tools, until the final entry. For the House of Correction, 12 locks, 30 chains, 36 iron rings to be set into walls. No House of Correction is ever mentioned again in the records. When questioned decades later, officials denied it existed. The page itself was found folded, almost hidden between two unrelated volumes. The margins tell another story. In pale ink, nearly lost to time, a clerk's hand added, "This order was never filled," burned in the fire. And still, witnesses centuries later remembered details too precise to ignore. A trader in the 1740s claimed his grandfather spoke of a night when the horizon glowed red though the sky was star-bright. He swore he heard the toll of a bell that no church had ever claimed. Another spoke of men who carried ledgers with whole sections cut away, leaving only ragged stubs where names once were. Such contradictions are not accidents, they are patterns. They are signs of deliberate erasure. But perhaps the most damning fragment lies not in Indiana, but in a Jesuit archive in Quebec. A thin diary, spine cracked, its cover missing. The entry dated October 1607 reads, "They built a place to bury the living. They called it mercy, but I called it damnation. On the 13th night, a fire without smoke took them, and the priests swore us to silence." The page ends mid-sentence, ink pooled as if the writer had dropped his pen. The following leaf is torn clean out. And so the story grows heavier. Maps name it, then unname it. Ledgers record it, then strike it away. Diaries whisper, then are mutilated. Always the same rhythm: reveal, erase, conceal. But why? Why was this place condemned to silence, its memory purged until only fragments remain? The fire should have left nothing but ashes. That is what officials claimed. A small blaze, quickly controlled. But the land remembers more than paper dares. For decades, No tree grew upon that acre. The grass itself curled, blackened at the tips, as though it drank from poisoned soil. Travelers along the Wabash avoided it, writing in journals that their horses balked, refusing to set hoof upon it. One trader noted, the ground was not ground, but hollow, as if charred bones formed the soil. He would not camp there, though night pressed cold against the wilderness. And the ruins, if ruins they were, refused to vanish. Even a century later, settlers spoke of low stone walls, barely visible under moss, shaped in a way no farmstead required. Some swore they saw rings carved into the rock, as if once used to shackle wrists or ankles. Children dared each other to approach and return pale, muttering of whispers that called them by name though no one stood nearby. A German immigrant in 1752 wrote, "It is cursed. When we touched the stone, it bled as if alive." His letter ends abruptly, with ink smeared across the page, like the hand shook too violently to steady itself. There was also the bell. Always the bell. No steeple, no tower. Yet night travelers claimed they heard it. A single toll, heavy, mournful. Some said it rang once a year on the anniversary of the fire. Others claimed it tolled at random, warning of storms or deaths that followed in the weeks to come. None could agree on its origin, but none dared linger to test it. Folklore grew. By the 1800s, locals told of the vanished 12. Patients, or prisoners, or children, depending on the storyteller. Some said they still wandered the woods, faces burned black, their mouths opening and closing without sound. Others claimed they never left the chapel. That if you stepped into the ruins on a moonless night, you would hear a dozen chairs scrape across stone as unseen bodies rose to greet you. No historian has found proof of 12. But proof is not what clings to a place like this. It is memory. Memory so stubborn it survives fire, silence, and denial. Even the soil seemed to protest. Farmers who tilled the edge of the land swore their crops spoiled, twisting into grotesque forms. One recorded in his almanac, "My corn grew black husks, my wheat sprouted thorns. I will not farm there again." Another claimed calves were born with twisted legs, unable to walk. Whether natural blight or not, the community whispered one explanation: the asylum burned still. And that question lingers, gnawing at every retelling. If the fire consumed everything, why do the ruins remain? If the asylum was small and unremarkable, why do maps, letters, and diaries mark it in terror, then bury it in silence? If the blaze was an accident, why does the land itself recoil, century after century, as though still in pain? It is tempting to believe the asylum ended in 1607, that the fire closed the story, neat and final. But the archives whisper otherwise. In 1693, a Jesuit priest stationed in Vincennes confessed to hearing the cries of the damned on the banks of the Wabash. His diary entry was short, hurried, and buried between hymns. But in the margin, he had added a single sentence in Latin: "Non dumis Dei, sed inferni." Not the house of God, but of hell. The church suppressed the entry. Copies that survived into the 19th century show the line crossed out in thick black ink. Yet the words bled through the page, faint but insistent. Explorers too were drawn, and some never returned. In 1778, a small surveying party mapped the valley. 2 men vanished on the second night. Their companions swore they had left camp only to follow the sound of a bell. The bodies were never found, though their tools were discovered weeks later in a hollow tree, wrapped carefully in cloth as if prepared for burial. One survivor, shaken, recorded, "The woods are wrong there. It is not silence, but listening. The trees incline as if bending to hear us. I will not walk that land again." Stranger still are the reports of voices. By 1831, farmers and trappers told of hearing names whispered in the ruins. Their names. A hunter swore that as he aimed at a deer, a voice behind him murmured his baptismal name in perfect tone. When he turned, the clearing was empty. He abandoned his rifle, fleeing without it, and never returned. Another tale, recorded in a local broadsheet, described a child repeating phrases in Latin, though she had never studied the language. Her parents claimed she had wandered too close to the ruins at dusk. She spoke only 3 words, again and again, veni ad nos, come to us. Those who attempted to write of the asylum, scholars, antiquarians, even novelists, complained of missing pages. Diaries where sections had been neatly excised, papers misplaced from archives. A professor in 1859 swore his manuscript caught fire on his desk, though the candle was unlit. Only the chapter on the asylum was consumed. Is it paranoia, coincidence, or does the fire still reach out, 4 centuries later, to silence any who dare repeat its tale? And so the story circles back to its first, terrible question. The asylum burned. The records erased. The ruins linger. But why does the fire continue to consume even memory itself? The ground in Indiana should be ordinary earth, black soil, rich and fertile, eager for corn and wheat. Yet there is one place, 1 acre, where the earth recoils, where maps lie, where diaries tremble, where voices call. 4 centuries of silence have not buried it. On the contrary, they have sharpened it, like a blade honed with every retelling. The asylum was not supposed to exist. The fire was not supposed to spread. And yet here we are, piecing together fragments from the ash. The official story says nothing, but the ruins say otherwise. The bell tolls otherwise. The children's names, never written, never remembered, still whisper otherwise. So we must ask the question they buried. If the asylum was erased, why do we still feel its weight? If the fire was contained, why does the earth still smolder? And if the dead were laid to rest, why do their voices keep calling us back? Stay with me. Subscribe, if you dare, to uncover more of these forgotten tragedies, because the asylum that burned in 1607 is not just a story. It is a wound. And wounds do not close when the world refuses to heal them. The question is not whether the asylum existed. The question is whether you are willing to dig deep enough to hear what it left behind. Perhaps you will find the missing names. Perhaps you will trace the erased ink. Perhaps you will walk that acre yourself. But if you do not answer when the bell tolls. The year was 1607, and Indiana was still wilderness. No state lines, no counties, no tidy borders to anchor memory. It was a vast, shifting expanse of rivers and hardwood forests, a land seen by traders and missionaries, but rarely settled for long. To outsiders, it was fertile soil, rich game, and opportunity. To those who walked it daily, the Miami, the Shawnee, the Illini, it was sacred ground, threaded with stories far older than any parchment. But 1607 was a year of ambition. Across the Atlantic, England had planted its flag in Virginia with the founding of Jamestown. Spain already gripped Mexico and the Southwest. France pushed deeper into Canada and eyed the rivers that flowed south. Indiana's lands, remote and ungoverned, were not immune to the gaze of empire. Fur traders pushed west from Quebec. Priests carried crucifixes and Latin texts, and soldiers spoke of outposts. That might tame the wilderness. It was in this tense seam between worlds that the asylum, or house of correction, as some whispered, was conceived. Not as a grand stone institution, but as a crude experiment. A place where the unwanted could be hidden, where disorder could be confined, where Europe could test its order upon the new land. The records that survive, if they are to be trusted, describe it blandly, a structure of timber and stone, raised quickly with the labor of men whose names are not preserved. A building, for instruction and mercy, one report calls it. Another lists supplies, grain, iron rings, chains. They called it mercy, yet their mercy required shackles. What kind of souls were sent here? The ledgers do not say plainly. Theories abound: vagrants swept from port towns, the mentally ill removed from sight, children abandoned in overcrowded convents. perhaps even debtors or petty criminals transported as correctional subjects. Whatever their names and crimes, or lack thereof, they were faceless in official papers, mere numbers, ordered, delivered, erased. The asylum sat on a ridge above the Wabash River, its walls meant to endure the cold. A crude chapel rose at its center, capped with a small iron bell. To those who built it, this bell was a symbol of civilization planted in wilderness. To those who heard it toll in the night, it was the sound of confinement echoing across the trees. The world around the asylum was already tense. The tribes who had lived in Indiana for centuries watched the newcomers with suspicion. Jesuit accounts, centuries later, described negotiations, offerings, and warnings. "This land does not want such a house," one interpreter recorded. Yet the French insisted. The priests wrote of salvation, the traders of order, the soldiers of necessity. To the settlers and clergy, the asylum was not horror but progress. It meant that the new world could mirror the old, every disorder contained, every deviance punished, every soul forced toward a rigid salvation. They celebrated its raising with hymns, wine, and the toll of the bell. But beneath that veneer of respectability, something restless stirred. The Miami spoke of fires that would not die. The Shawnee warned of houses that rot the earth. And in their stories, repeated in camps and longhouses, one message recurred: the land remembers what it rejects. And so, before the fire ever began, the stage was set. A wilderness scarred by ambition. A structure built to cage the unwanted. A bell that tolled not freedom but confinement. A land that whispered refusal. The question was never if tragedy would come, but when. The asylum of 1607 was no sprawling fortress. It was small, almost crude. Timber walls, rough stone foundations, a single narrow hall where the captives were kept. Yet its smallness did not make it less severe. Within its walls, silence was law, broken only by the toll of the iron bell at dawn and dusk. From the surviving records, we glimpse routines designed to mimic civility. At dawn, a psalm was sung. At midday, a thin meal of cornmeal or salted meat was served. At dusk, prayers again. By candlelight, the captives were instructed to copy letters, recite catechism, or sit in silence with their chains fixed to the wall. To outsiders, priests, traders, visiting officers, this was order. They saw a little outpost of Europe carved into wilderness, a place where disorder was made orderly, where the unwanted were shaped into subjects of God and crown. They wrote of it with pride, describing it as a beacon of mercy in a savage land. But the papers betray contradictions. One diary fragment from 1607, found in the Jesuit archives centuries later, describes the scene differently. "I walked the hall at night. The chains clinked like teeth. The children, for they are children, wept in their sleep. The bell tolled though none pulled the rope. I prayed, but the air itself resisted me. The respectable surface was always fragile. Supplies ran low, winters bit hard, and the wilderness pressed in. Wolves prowled close to the asylum walls. The river, often swollen with spring floods, cut them off from traders for weeks at a time. And then there were the patients themselves. Who were they? Too young, many said, to be criminals. Too wild, others claimed, to be innocent. Their names were never preserved, only numbers scrawled in ledgers. Numbers 1 through 12. Yet whispers in later accounts gave them shadows. The boy who would not speak, the girl who prayed in Latin though she had never been taught, the twins who moved in eerie unison. To the priests, these were souls to be tamed. To the guards, burdens to be managed. To the land itself, perhaps, intruders that demanded a reckoning. The chapel was the heart of the asylum. Crude stone, timber roof, a wooden altar, and the bell tower above. Here, prayers were said for mercy. Here, punishments were delivered when prayers failed. Some accounts speak of lashes, others of forced fasts, still others of nights locked in darkness. Yet all agree that the bell tolled at strange hours, midnight, noon, dawn, without a hand upon its rope. A guard, interviewed decades later, confessed in a letter, the bell was no longer ours. When it rang, the children grew still. When it rang, the air grew heavy, and we, grown men, feared it most of all. Despite all this, the asylum persisted. Traders stopped to deliver supplies. Priests came and went. Some even praised its discipline in letters sent east. And yet, beneath every word of praise runs a subtle unease. Too many letters avoid detail. Too many ledgers skip entire months. Too many maps omit the place entirely. It is as if even in its first days, the asylum was meant to be both present and absent, visible yet concealed. Respectable on the surface, but trembling beneath. By the autumn of 1607, rumors were already spreading beyond the asylum walls. Native scouts whispered of a glow in the trees at night, a fire that ate but did not consume. Traders joked nervously about the house that prayed to itself. A Jesuit passing through wrote only one sentence in his diary: "The asylum resists salvation." It was the first crack in the veneer, and it would not be the last. By late autumn of 1607, the asylum stood uneasy against the wilderness. The leaves fell in crimson sheets, the river swelled, and the air sharpened with frost. Winter promised to be cruel. Inside the walls, rations dwindled. Cornmeal stretched thin, salted meat nearly gone, candles burned low. Yet the asylum endured its rituals. The bell tolled at dawn and dusk. The captives, 12 in number, recited prayers, scratched letters by faint light, and obeyed the motions of civility. But beneath the surface, fear grew. The diaries of a Jesuit visitor, preserved in fragments, speak plainly. They are children. They do not belong here. I begged the overseer to release them to the villages. He refused, saying they were dangerous. Yet I see only hunger in their eyes, and a silence that weighs upon me. At night the bell tolls without hand. I believe it tolls for me. The wilderness, too, seemed to turn against them. Wolves came closer, howling outside the walls. The river froze strangely. Hard one night, then flowing the next. Storms rose without warning, lashing the timber until shingles split. But the strangest reports concern the chapel. Settlers later told of light flickering within them. No candle was lit. Guards confessed the altar shifted, the wood itself groaning as if under pressure. One even swore that the stone floor grew hot beneath his feet, though the hearth was cold. And always, the bell. It tolled in storm, in silence, in sleep. A sound that marked not the hours of prayer, but something older, heavier, more patient. The children, numbers 1 through 12, began to change. Some refused food, staring only at the altar. Others wept in their sleep, calling for mothers who would never come. The twins spoke in unison, whispering words the priests would not repeat. One god recorded. The boy at the end of the hole sang without pause. Not hymns, not psalms. Songs I did not know. The language was not Latin, not French, not any I knew. When he sang, the walls sweated. Folklore later claimed the children foresaw the fire. That they warned of it in riddles, sang of it in chants, or even willed it into being. Official records deny this, but official records deny nearly everything. By December, unease had turned to dread. Traders refused to enter the building. Priests came less often. A lone entry in a soldier's log hints at the fear spreading outward. The asylum burns already, though no flame is seen. We are told to stay away. The veneer of respectability had cracked. The wilderness pressed closer. Hunger gnawed at captives and guards alike. And in the chapel, the bell rang again, though by then, no one dared touch its rope. And so, the stage was set for the event that would erase the asylum from maps, silence it in archives, and yet preserve it forever in whispered stories. The fire was coming. The land had warned them. The children had warned them. The silence itself had warned them. But no one listened. The night began as ordinary, or so the ledgers say. December 13, 1607. The asylum settled under a hard frost. The river froze at its banks. The wind rattled bare branches. The captives were counted and chained. In the official report, preserved faintly in a French archive, the entry is dull. All present. Fire lit. Supplies checked. Nothing to hint at what would follow. But diaries and folklore tell another story. They whisper that the air was restless, that the wolves howled in unnatural chorus, that the bell tolled thrice though no one touched its rope. One guard later confessed under questioning. The fire in the hearth burned blue. I knew then something had shifted. We should have fled. The first sign came at the chapel. A flicker of light, brighter than candles, spilled through the cracks in the timber walls. Guards rushed in, fearing a lantern overturned. But inside, no flame could be found. The altar itself glowed, faint at first, then brighter, as though the wood smoldered from within. The children began to sing. Witnesses disagreed on the tune. Some swore it was a psalm, others said nonsense syllables, still others claimed it was Latin reversed. But all accounts agree the song rose louder, more urgent, until the air itself seemed to vibrate. Then the bell tolled. Once, twice, a third time, and when it did, the altar erupted. The official report, of course, downplays it. It states, a fire began in the chapel due to poor construction. Efforts were made to contain it, but the dry timber spread the blaze. Casualties were total. That is the version taught in the rare histories that even acknowledge the asylum. A tragic accident, regrettable but mundane. But the testimonies, those that slipped past the censors, tell of something far stranger. They speak of fire without smoke, flames that bent against the wind, sparks that leapt from wall to wall as if seeking. They speak of children standing unharmed in the blaze, eyes blank, mouths still singing as the timbers cracked above them. One priest wrote, his quill shaking, I saw the girl smile as the roof fell. She did not move to flee. She opened her arms as if to welcome the fire. The panic was immediate. Guards tried to force open doors that would not budge. One claimed the iron locks had fused to the wood, though no flame touched them. Another swore the chains rattled on their own, wrapping tighter around wrists that struggled. The overseer ordered the children dragged out, but by then the chapel floor split. Witnesses said they heard a roar, not of collapsing beams, but of something deeper, like the earth itself exhaling. The floor gaped, fire rushing upward, as though from a hidden furnace. One guard, years later, described it simply. The asylum did not burn down. It burned up, from the ground, from below. By midnight, the entire structure was aflame. Traders passing on the river saw the glow and assumed it was a beacon, until they realized the sky above was clear. No smoke, only light. Wolves scattered from the woods, howling as if in pain. The river itself steamed, ice cracking violently, as if recoiling from the heat. And still, the bell tolled. Accounts differ on how many times. Some say 12, one for each child. Others say 13, one extra toll for the house itself. But all agree no hand touched the rope. The bell swung in fire, its iron glowing red, its voice carrying for miles. At dawn, nothing remained but blackened beams and scorched earth. No bodies were recovered. The official report claims, all perished, but offers no detail. Folklore insists otherwise, that the children vanished, that the fire consumed walls but spared flesh, that their voices still echo in the ruins. The guards who survived swore never to speak. One was found drowned in the river weeks later. Another fled east, only to die in a tavern fire under suspicious circumstances. The few who lived long enough to tell their stories left fragments, letters half burned, diaries torn, words scribbled in margins. It was no accident. Thus ended the asylum, or so the records claim. But the fire did not end, not in memory, not in soil, not in story, because even in silence, the asylum burns still. At first light, scavengers came. Farmers from the nearest village, drawn by the glow they had seen from their fields, expecting to find survivors or spoils. But what they found unsettled them so deeply that some swore never to speak again. The ruins smoked but did not smolder. The ashes were cold unnaturally so, as though the fire had never been natural flame at all. Footprints circled the chapel's remains. Bare feet, small, pressed into ash. They led in circles, then stopped abruptly, as if the walkers had vanished mid-step. One farmer claimed to have found a rosary, half melted, the beads fused together. Another unearthed a page of scripture, perfectly intact, though the edges of the Bible around it were charred to nothing. The verse, according to a later retelling, was from Isaiah. "When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you." That detail was never mentioned in official accounts. In fact, the magistrates insisted no villagers ever approach the ruins. No artifacts were taken, no footprints discovered. Their version was tidy, contained the Asylum fire was tragic. But the matter is closed. Yet fragments tell otherwise. A trader's diary from Vincent speaks of smoke that rose from the earth for weeks after, choking the air with a sulphurous stench. A priest's letter laments, "I fear it was not the timber that burned, but the very ground. How can one bless land that itself rejects the holy?" The survivors' testimonies, rare and contradictory, sharpen the unease. One guard, half mad in prison for desertion, wrote that the children walked into the flames willingly, their chains clinking in rhythm, their eyes alight with a joy no earthly child should know. He begged his interrogators to scour the cellar beneath the chapel, for there the true fire lived. His pleas were ignored. Another, hiding in New France years later, whispered that he had heard voices in the flames calling names, his own among them. He claimed that the fire did not kill, but took, pulling souls downward. He ended his life by setting his house ablaze. And then there was the bell. When villagers searched the ruins, they found the bell lying cracked and blackened, its rope gone. Yet at night, travelers still swore they heard it tolling across the river. One diary from 1612 records, "The sound was faint, carried on the wind. It told not the hour, but the silence between hours." Children in nearby hamlets began to dream of fire, of chains, of corridors that narrowed until they ended in flames. Parents spoke of waking to find their children standing at windows, staring toward the ruined acre, lips moving soundlessly. Some called it hysteria. Others called it inheritance. The authorities, desperate to quash unrest, bulldozed what remained of the beams, filling the ground with soil hauled from distant farms. But still, nothing grew there. The land blackened seeds, withered sprouts, and cracked the hooves of animals driven across it. The official record closes its book on the fire with finality. Yet every unofficial account ends with uneasy. But not everyone agreed on what really happened. The governor's report, stamped with wax and dispatched to distant authorities, described the Asylum fire as an unfortunate accident: a lantern toppled, timbers dry, a building consumed in moments. No mention of footprints in ash, no mention of voices in flame, no mention of bells tolling after the fact. But diaries, letters, and whispered testimonies suggest otherwise. A merchant passing through weeks later described the ruins as cold as the grave, though steam rose from the soil. He swore he saw a child's handprint, scorched into stone, smaller than his palm, its outline blackened into permanence. A Jesuit missionary, writing in Latin to his superiors, confessed uneasy, "I performed rites, yet the ground refused." The flames were not natural. They were hungrier, deliberate. If this was fire, then fire itself has turned traitor. His letter was never acknowledged. Then came the folk tales. Villagers told of travelers who vanished when camping near the ruins, their possessions left behind in neat piles. Children claimed to see a building standing in the smoke, where adults saw only ashes. And in the winters that followed, the toll of the bell was heard most clearly on nights of frost, when fire should be weakest. It was not long before they whispered the word curse. Some said the asylum had been built on land already unclean, a native burial ground unsettled by conquest. Others claimed the asylum's keepers performed forbidden rites, locking away not just the insane, but the inconvenient. The unwanted heirs, the silenced daughters, the broken sons of prominent families, the truth drowned in contradiction. Yet one fact remained consistent across every account. Not all who entered the asylum were accounted for in the ashes. The official tally of the dead never matched the asylum's own ledgers. There were names missing, staff unlisted, children unnamed, bodies unfound. Some argued they fled into the woods, never to be seen again. Others insisted they were taken by the fire, devoured into some other place. And in the silence left behind, the unanswered questions grew louder than the flames ever had. Even now, centuries later, scholars who revisit the case divide sharply. Was it an accident suppressed for political reasons? Or was it the birth of something darker, a wound in the land itself, bleeding still? The authorities wrote their neat ending. The villagers whispered another. The ruins themselves offered a third. And so, as the story passes down, it concludes as all stories of this place do. But not everyone agreed on what really happened. History is a mirror fractured into shards. Every shard reflects a different face of the truth, and none can be trusted in its entirety. The asylum fire of 1607 is no exception. The first and most respectable theory came from the officials themselves. In their neatly inked reports, the asylum was doomed by negligence. A lamp left too long burning, a careless guard, a building of timber dried by drought. In this telling, there is no malice, no curse, no haunting, only human error. Newspapers, when they finally reached the frontier settlements years later, repeated this version faithfully. A tragic fire claims the lives of the unwell and their keepers. The settlement moves forward, undeterred. This theory demanded no belief in devils or curses. It soothed the minds of those who preferred order over chaos. And yet, locals refused to accept it. Farmers who had seen the flames from miles away argued that no natural fire could burn so high, so quickly. Hunters swore the blaze leapt against the wind, as if guided by will. Survivors' fragments only deepened doubt. One claimed the lantern fell after the fire had already begun. Another insisted he saw no lantern at all, only a sudden bloom of fire, as if from the earth itself. The official version faltered under these contradictions. But for those desperate to protect their own consciences, the negligence theory was convenient. After all, if it was merely carelessness, then no one had to answer for the voices in the night, or the tolling of a ruined bell. The second theory crept in the margins of diaries, and in whispered tales passed between villages, that the fire was no accident at all, but punishment. A haunting long promised. This version begins long before 1607, with the land itself. Oral traditions among displaced native tribes told of a burial ground, a place never meant to be disturbed. One Jesuit diary notes, "They warned us, but we did not listen. They said their dead walked here. We dug foundations anyway. We chained our poor to beds above bones that were never ours." According to this telling, the asylum was cursed from the moment its beams were raised. The fire was not an accident, but the land reclaiming itself, fire rising from soil to purge what should never have been built. Yet another voice insists otherwise still, that the haunting did not come from the land, but from the inmates themselves. A matron's logbook fragment, scorched but legible, records her dread of certain children. They do not sleep. They hum songs I do not know. They watch me with eyes too old, too steady. When I ask where they learned these chants, They smile and say, "The chapel teaches us." But no priest has been near them. Folklore claims the children gathered in the chapel at night, tracing circles into the dust, whispering names that were not their own. If this was true, then the fire was no accident nor curse from outside. It was conjured from within, born of mouths too young to speak such words. If the fire was not mere accident, and not simply curse, then what was it? Another theory, darker still, spread in fragments through letters confiscated and hidden away, that the fire was not tragedy but ritual. Some whispered that the asylum was never truly an asylum at all, but a veil, a convenient cover for experiments best left unnamed. The ledger of supplies, discovered in the archives decades later, lists curious shipments, barrels of saltpeter far beyond what a small garrison required, wax by the hundredweight, and tinctures noted only as, for chapel use. What chapel required such things? One diary from a guard tells of midnight gatherings, not of the insane, but of the staff. The so-called doctors, the matron, even the chaplain himself, meeting by candlelight with symbols carved into the wooden floor. He claimed they sought to bind what they could not cure, to exchange the screams of the inmates for whispers of power. The letter ends abruptly. The rest of the page is blackened, and then there is the matter of the missing names. The official tally after the fire listed 36 dead, but the asylum's payroll ledger names 42 staff. Where, then, are the 6? Were they ash beyond recognition, or were they spared? Some argue they fled before the fire, bribed into silence. Others claim they became its architects, lighting the spark not as accident, but as offering. In Vincent's, a merchant's account records rumors of a secret society. Men who built the asylum not to heal but to contain. They held it down as long as they could. He writes, but fire was the price of failure. What exactly they sought to contain is left unsaid. The political theorists push yet another story, that the asylum was an inconvenience. It housed not just the broken and the mad, but debtors, vagrants, and orphans who strained the resources of the fledgling settlement. Better to erase the burden with fire, then claim tragedy, than to admit intentional cruelty. The speed with which the ground was bulldozed, the records sealed, and survivors silenced lends weight to this suspicion. It was not only fire that erased the asylum, it was will. So we are left with theories, an accident of negligence, a curse born of stolen land, children whispering words not their own, doctors playing at rituals, officials covering their sins with flames. Each theory contradicts the next, yet each holds fragments of truth. And in their contradictions, the fire grows larger, more untamable than any one story could contain. The closer one studies the asylum fire of 1607, the less it resembles history, and the more it resembles a riddle. Every telling contradicts the last, and every witness speaks with a tongue that trembles between confession and invention. Was it carelessness? A lamp toppled, a guard asleep, the simplest tragedy. That version still sits in official ledgers, copied in neat ink, preserved in archives. But neat ink does not erase blackened soil or the absence of bodies unaccounted for. Was it curse? The land itself, defiled by foundations, spitting fire upward in revolt. That theory explains the sterility of the earth, the way no crops grow on that acre still. And yet, no curse explains why children's dreams were filled with flames long before the night of the fire. Was it ritual? The staff gathering in the chapel by night, their symbols burned into the wood, their chants mistaken for prayers. That would explain the missing shipments, the silence of officials, the half-burned diary that breaks off mid-page. And yet, ritual demands purpose. And to this day, no one knows what was sought, what was promised, or what was unleashed. In the end, each theory answers one question, but opens three more. If negligence, why do villagers still hear the bell? If curse, Why were the inmates the first to walk into flames, eyes unblinking? If ritual, why does no surviving account ever name the right? The contradictions gnaw at one another, leaving behind only doubt, and unease, and the haunting suspicion that all the theories are correct, and none are. The villagers, pressed for answers, eventually stopped asking. They buried their questions in silence, for silence was safer. Officials moved forward, building new farms, new roads, pretending the blackened acre was nothing more than wasted soil. But beneath the silence, the fire burned on. In stories, in whispers, in the tolling of a bell that should not be heard. No theory, no record, no priestly rite has smothered it. Instead, the asylum fire of 1607 lingers as all wounds do, infected, festering, unresolved. And so we arrive at the most unsettling truth of all centuries pass, and yet the blackened acre remains. Maps change, borders shift, towns rise and fall. But the ruins of 1607 resist both time and memory. Even now, the land refuses its harvest. Farmers who attempted to plow it spoke of oxen collapsing mid-furrow, of seeds withering before they sprouted, of tools breaking in hand. In one parish register from the 1700s, a priest records the stubbornness of the earth. We laid holy water upon it. We blessed it thrice. Still the soil vomits back the seed. By then, the story of the asylum fire had already curdled into legend. No longer was it a footnote in a magistrate's report. It became a whispered inheritance. The tale traveled from hearth to hearth, embroidered with each retelling. Children dared each other to walk the edge of the acre by moonlight, to listen for the bell that tolled, where no tower stood. Travelers on horseback reported strange lights, small and flickering, as if a chapel still burned in the mist. Others swore they saw figures wandering the field at dawn. Barefoot children with soot, blackened faces, their eyes reflecting embers. Folklore gave the asylum many names: the acre of ashes, the chapel without walls, the bell of the vanished. By the early 1800s, as Indiana became more settled, families building near the site recorded disturbances in their journals. A settler woman wrote of hearing knocks on her cabin door, each night at the same hour. When opened, no one stood there, only the faint smell of smoke drifting across the field. Her children dreamed of fire, though no flame touched the cabin. She moved within the year. Even skeptics could not deny the physical unease of the place. Horses balked at crossing it. Compasses spun wildly at its center. Hunters claimed game avoided it entirely, as though the acre were a wound in the earth, one animals instinctively refused to step upon. By the mid-19th century, the asylum fire was largely forgotten outside local circles, but within the villages nearby, it was still spoken of in hushed tones, especially in winters when frost sharpened the air and the bell's toll was said to carry across frozen fields. In 1867, a journalist attempting to collect frontier folklore published a piece on the site, dismissing it as superstition. He mocked the idea of fire that left soil barren for 2 centuries. And yet, his notes end abruptly. Weeks later, the paper reported his sudden death from unexplained fever. Locals were unsurprised. They claimed the asylum does not forgive mockery. So the legacy endured, not in official records, but in whispers. And every whisper carried the same warning: the fire has not ended. By the late 19th century, the asylum fire of 1607 was nearly erased from textbooks, but it survived stubbornly in oral tradition. Children were told not to wander too far after dusk, lest the chapel flame catch their clothes. Families warned against tilling too close to the acre, not for fear of ghosts, but because crops there would blacken and livestock would fall ill. And yet, the silence surrounding the asylum began to draw curiosity. Folklorists, amateur historians, and eventually spiritualists arrived, eager to peel back the layers of the tale. Some came with pen and notebook, others with crucifix and candle, others with little more than bravado. Few stayed long. One of the earliest documented returns came in 1881, when a surveyor attempted to map the area. His report, archived in Indianapolis, describes a peculiar heat, radiating from the ground in winter, the soil warm enough to melt snow in a perfect circle. His notes end with a chilling line, "A bell tolled once at noon. My men heard it too. There is no bell." Decades later, spiritualists of the 1890s treated the acre as a testing ground for seances. Mediums claimed to hear children's voices rising from beneath the soil, chanting in unison. A few even declared they had seen the asylum itself flicker back into form, as though rebuilt from smoke and flame, only to vanish again when touched. Skeptics laughed, but the stories persisted. Local farmers grew resentful of outsiders trespassing on cursed land. One farmer is recorded to have chased a group of mediums away with rifle in hand, shouting, "You won't bring that fire back on my soil." In the 20th century, when the ghost hunting craze emerged, the acre became a whispered destination. Explorers spoke of compasses spinning, of cameras refusing to capture clear images, of audio devices recording distant tolls of bells and faint weeping. A few claimed to see shadows moving in patterns, almost as if shackled together, vanishing as soon as the eye focused. Archivists too uncovered troubling anomalies. Records from the asylum remain inconsistent, ledgers with pages torn away, payrolls not matching burial lists, official reports redacted beyond recognition. One archivist wrote in frustration, "The more I read, the less I understand. It is as though the fire has reached into the archives themselves, burning away clarity." And still, the legend refused to die. Each generation added its layer, each investigator left unsettled. The acre remained, silent, baying and waiting. Some began to suggest the fire had never ended at all, but smoldered invisibly, feeding on memory and fear, rising in flames only when forgotten. A living wound, demanding attention. So the legacy grew darker, not dimmer, and those who approached the acre learned one lesson above all. The fire waits for those who seek it. Even now, in the 21st century, the blackened acre in Indiana remains untouched. Satellite images show it as a dark patch, vegetation sparse, the soil resistant. Developers have circled it, debated it, but no structure stands upon it for long. A farmhouse once raised nearby burned under mysterious circumstances in 1974. A later storage shed collapsed without cause. Attempts to pave a road over the acre ended when the asphalt cracked within months, as though the ground itself rejected weight. Ghost hunters still venture there. Some leave with nothing but unease. Others return with voices on their recorders, low, layered, childlike, chanting in words no linguist has ever traced. A few swear they heard the toll of the bell, clear and deep, though no tower has stood since 1607. One even claimed the sound rang not in the ears, but in the bones. Local children still dare each other to cross the acre on Halloween nights. Those who do often return pale and trembling, unable to explain what they felt. "Like something was walking with me," said one boy in 1992, "but when I turned, there was only smoke." And so, the asylum that burned refuses to fade. It lingers as both history and curse, tragedy and inheritance. Every attempt to explain it, negligence, curse, ritual, conspiracy, only deepens the unease. The event cannot be contained, for it is not only a fire in the past. It is a fire in the present, still smoldering in silence, still waiting for those who dare to remember. Perhaps that is the truest legacy of the asylum, not ash, not ruins, but memory itself. A memory that refuses to stay buried. So I leave you with this question. If the asylum never truly ended, if the fire still breathes beneath the soil, what might you awaken if you tried to uncover the names erased from its ledgers? Would you hear the bell toll again? Would you see the chapel rise in smoke? Would you find the children waiting for you, barefoot in the ash? If you dare, return to the archives. Seek the missing names. Trace the forgotten ledgers. walk the acre. But remember this: when the bell tolls, you must not answer. If you want me to continue uncovering these buried histories, stories they tried to erase, then subscribe now, share this tale, and leave your theory in the comments. Because the fire of 1607 has not ended. And if you've listened this far, you are already standing in its glow.